Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm Matt Whitaker. Glad you could join us today. As you know, every Friday, 7 p.m., we premiere on CPAC Now. And you can also catch us on all the podcast channels, on Rumble, and of course, everything I'm doing is on whitaker.tv. So before we get started, I just wanted to say one thing about the state of our country and the state of our world. First of all, the border is an absolute mess. The crisis at our border is staggering. As spring is here, we are seeing so many people come to our southern border, and this administration seems unwilling or unable to get it under control. As many of you know, in the Trump administration, we had the border flows down to a trickle. A lot of that were because of policies like our Remain in Mexico policy, which was effective. It allowed people to continue to declare for amnesty or for asylum and be adjudicated, but they just had to stay in the safe third country, which was Mexico. In addition, I think many of you, like me, several weeks ago watched the State of the Union address and were staggered by Joe Biden suggesting that his party was the party of funding the police. There are so many examples, and I shared some in a 7-minute video that somebody else had prepared on Twitter. Again, my Twitter is Matt Whitaker 46. If you want to follow me there. Same thing on Truth Social. I'm at Matt Whitaker 46. Nonetheless, I was staggered because so many Democrats and so many on the left have for so long been anti-police. They have not backed the men and women of law enforcement. In fact, they have blamed the men and women of law enforcement for many of the challenges that our society faces. As you know, I am going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement. I'm going to back the men and women in blue. It was one of my greatest honors as Attorney General to everywhere I could possibly say it, to say that we had their backs and they had our thanks. And I will forever believe that, and I will support law enforcement, and I will support politicians funding and backing with our hard-earned tax dollars law enforcement so they can do their important jobs. They are our heroes, and they deserve our thanks. Finally, I just wanted to comment briefly on another important issue, and that is the United States of America and the American dream. You know, the American dream is unique to the United States, and there is no French dream or German dream. People don't flock from around the world trying to get their piece of some other country's dream. Everyone wants to come here to the United States and pursue the American dream. I know so many people that have started with nothing and have built lives of hard work, humble dedication and to their community and to their families and to their faith, and they have leaned in and worked hard, and over a lifetime they've built something, whether that and that is defined on however they define success in their mind. And so I just want to say that we need to all work to preserve the American dream and make sure that it is available to future generations to pursue however they define success, because this is the only country where someone can come, barely know the language, if at all, and make a life, create a family, create generational wealth, and, under the red, white, and blue. And so thanks for joining us here on Liberty and Justice. I'm Matt Whitaker. I'm going to play now a recent interview I had with my friend Kash Patel. I think you'll find it very interesting and worth your time. So right after the break, Kash Patel and I talk about what he's working on now. Kash Patel, thanks for joining Liberty and Justice.
I'm good, Matt.
How are you
Thanks
doing?
so much for having me on the program.
Good. I've been looking forward to this ever since I even conceived the idea of a little show. Kind of one of the ideas I had is we never have a platform as conservatives to talk about the good things. We're always, sort of got the media attacking us and loaded questions trying to, sort of make us look bad. But I wanted people to get to know people like you, people that I respect a lot, people that I have a close relationship with, and, kind of hear what you're about and hear what you're doing. Because, you're doing important work out there. So I guess let's just jump into it. We first met when you were working for Devin up in Congress, and you guys were fighting I think one of the most evil people in Congress, and that is I guess the chairman Schiff of the House Intel Committee. Why don't you talk a little bit about those battles, and I guess confirm for me or explain to me why he's not one of the most evil people.
Well, I definitely will not disagree with you on that one, Matt. I do think, it's sad that we have to joke about a member of Congress, a member of the Gang of Eight, who has access to the most secure intelligence on planet Earth in such a fashion, because as you and I know, we've served multiple administrations, those positions are supposed to be apolitical, even in Congress. But the fact that Adam Schiff has done nothing than glorify his own ego and politics in that position just hurts America. And hearkening back to, being the chief investigator for the Russiagate investigation under Devin Nunes, and, basically unraveling the biggest scandal and criminal enterprise in presidential election history, the biggest co-conspirator in that was, unfortunately, Adam Schiff, who at the time was a ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. He took it upon himself, along with guys like Swalwell and company, because Trump was running and then Trump won. It blew up the landscape, and they said, what comes first? Not national security, politics and the media. And nobody had ever heard of Adam Schiff before Russiagate. Nobody had ever heard of Swalwell before Russiagate. And Devin will tell you, nobody had ever heard of Devin, really before Russiagate, because the House Intel Committee did its work under the current of politics, because it was so important to for not just Intel, but law enforcement and DOD. And, look, those guys continue to this day to trumpet lies about President Trump. We know he didn't collude. We proved it. We know Hillary Clinton started it, paid for it. Mm-hmm. And we know we'll talk about the corruption at the FBI and DOJ, where you and I served as national security president. You served as the head. And for guys like us to see that politicization could happen from the James Comeys of the world, it was just tragic for me, and sad that, I used to run those programs. I used to run those cases. I used to appear before those courts. And to know that exculpatory evidence can be withheld, to know that false information from sources can be knowingly put forward just to attack a political target, those are things that personify what Adam Schiff was all about and continues to be about. And so you're not going to get a disagreement from me on that one.
Yeah, and I guess, I think that's the other thing that a lot of folks, we get so used to it as conservatives, just getting our brains kicked in by the media, being discredited. I mean, this is the thing is like you and I, this is, you were a national security prosecutor, kind of making sure that you were putting the bad guys that wanted to do great harm. I was a U.S. attorney for 5.5 years. And then, we were both chiefs for what I like to refer to as the cabinet of the government. And as compared to the cabinet of the bureaucracy, it's kind of those four fundamental cabinet positions that I think are so important to, really what makes the United States unique. It's justice, it's treasury, it's state, and then, of course, the Department of Defense, where you were with Acting Secretary Miller. And so, I just think, we could talk for hours about all these various experiences, but I think some of this needs to be informed, and people that are kind of new to this or have just stumbled upon, Matt Whitaker and Kash Patel talking about these issues. This is something of which we know very well and have a lot of experience, and can't be dismissed, no matter how hard they've tried to, by, their typical tricks of, discrediting us with, false and inflamed allegations of, complete BS, let's be honest. But, so at some point in time, you're up working for Devin, the election happens, and then you decide to come into the administration. I guess I don't remember if it was before or after. There was a lot going on for me personally after that midterm in 2018. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you went from Capitol Hill? I guess you were in the executive branch as a prosecutor, then jumped to Congress, and then came back into the administration for President Trump. Why don't you talk a little bit about that process for you?
Yeah, the quick story there is I was in executive, as you said, as federal prosecutor, jumped over the Hill. Look, when I met Devin, I met him through a mutual friend, and I was trying to get my mutual friend a job. And Devin approached me and said, hey, you're a former public defender, former federal prosecutor, former intel guy, had some experience at JSTOC as a civilian doing targeting. He's like, we got this Russiagate investigation. And at that time, people were like, Russiagate? Like, whatever, right? And he and I were like,
Just put gate after it. If it's in Washington, D.C., put gate after it.
It's every other Tuesday. So I was like, look, I really, in all honesty, I told Devin, I was like, I don't want to work on Capitol Hill. I have no desire, no offense, to work on the Hill. I just want to go into the White House and do national security work. And one thing led to another, best laid plans, and I ended up running the Russiagate investigation. And at the time we took it on, we were both like, no one's going to pay attention to this thing. We're going to write a memo, a report, stick it on the shelf, and off we go. Little did we know. And so after running that investigation...
Little did we know, exactly.
And, it's best summarized in The Plot Against the President. I know you've seen the documentary and read the book, but I think that best captures Devin and I's involvement in that episode in our history. And then he was, true to his word, helped me get to the National Security Council, where I ran counterterrorism for President Trump, and then ultimately became Chief of Staff of the Department of Defense with the stop in between as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence.
It was amazing watching your, again, a talented guy that had a lot of experience, that was much needed talent-wise at the White House and in the administration. And I'm sure that you, on a constant basis, were having bidding wars by cabinet secretaries wanting you on their team.
I think the bidding wars were to not have me on their team with some of the cabinet secretaries.
Oh, that's not. I know that's not true, but. And so now, you're chief of staff at DOD. That's a massive organization. Talk a little bit about, I like to say, when I was chief and then ultimately the attorney general, that if a decision came to our desk, that just meant that there was 140,000 other people that didn't want to make that decision. I mean, DOD is even bigger than that. So why don't you talk a little bit about just the size and scope of that portfolio?
Yeah, so and you're totally right. And I've never said this in any interview, but I'll admit it to you because we're good friends. There is no job on planet Earth that prepares you to be a chief of staff at any one of the four agencies we're talking about. There just isn't. You can't replicate that. You can't replicate justice. You can't replicate state. You can't replicate DOD or Treasury in the private sector. It's unrealistic. So when people are like, oh, he's not qualified, no one's qualified. It doesn't exist.
Right.
And so when I got over there and you sort of understand, having done a stint at JSOC, I had awareness of what DOD was and how big it was, but I was in my JSOC bubble. It's the largest organization on planet Earth. I had 3 million employees, 700.
That literally circles the globe.
It's $740 billion budget and $2 trillion in assets. And so how do you take all that on while conducting the defense of our nation, making sure our veterans have what they need, making sure our service members have what they need and their families are taken care of, along with funding the advancement of national security in America? I mean, that's the magnitude of the job. And people talk about, Amazon and Musk. And I was like, Amazon and Musk were like my lunch on a Friday afternoon because they were subsidiaries of the Department of Defense. And that's how big that job is. And that's why I say, in all earnesty, nobody's prepared for that job. It's hands-on learning. You were the Attorney General. You had 150,000 employees conducting the most important law enforcement mission on planet Earth. You can I can relate to you how difficult that is. I can't relate to my friends in the private sector the magnitude of that job.
Well, and that's the thing is it is, at DOJ we had FBI, ATF, Bureau of Prisons, Marshals. So many, DEA. So many of these important agencies, and you only had the Air Force, the Marines, the Army, and those are, it had to be like a very interesting job, but you quickly realize, and what I realized from day one, even though I had done almost 6 years at the department as a U.S. attorney, and so I had a sense of how it worked. You got to learn about priorities, and you got to kind of learn. It's very much the application of sort of that. Those boxes. Is it urgent? Is it important? Is it not important but urgent? And work through that every day and try to get to that second quadrant. Where it's not urgent but important, and because that's where the good policy is made, and that's where you can actually make a difference in advancing some of these priorities of the president, which is ultimately
and
your
you hit
job.
The nail on the head. And that's just, I think that's the difference between not me and you, but us two grouped together and so many other people. We follow the chain of command. The priorities for the national security apparatus come from the commander in chief. He was elected, he sets them. And unless they're unlawful, which I can't think of a single one under President Trump, you execute those priorities. And that's how you sort of navigate the quagmire of saying, what's a tier one, what's a tier two, what's a tier three? It's not my decision. What did the commander in chief say? Is Iran the top priority today? Is China? Is Russia? Is our border, our submarines, our aircrafts, what have you? And so once you're able to grasp that you don't set the priority and put aside your ego saying, just because I sit in this seat, I'm going to countermand the direction of the commander in chief, which so many people did, then it's easy because President Trump's priorities were simple. America first, defend the border, take on China, take on Russia, annihilate Iran and its terrorists, and protect America. It's not complicated. And then whatever falls underneath those policy priorities, I was able to fortunately say, yes, this is what we're going to do. And I guess that's the job of a chief of staff, to make sure those priorities get executed by the department and the cabinet secretary.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about this is the good news is we can have a discussion and then we can both make sure that it's what we wanted to say. But let's talk about institutional resistance, because this is something I saw at the Department of Justice, and really I'm sure at DOD you saw a lot of institutional resistance. I mean, we saw a lot of it play out in front of our very eyes, where the generals just disagreed with the President of the United States, their commander in chief, and didn't either slow rolled it or kind of convinced him that what he wanted to do wasn't what should be done. Talk about kind of that, sort of leading in that environment where you have people that are working against you.
I had a similar experience when, our friend Rick Grinnell was the acting DNI and I was a principal deputy running our intelligence community. And then over at DOD, it was similar. I get that uniformed generals are supposed to be the subject matter experts of their areas of the world or their specific MOS, and we need that. But I was shocked to see 4-star generals go in and basically say, we are not going to follow the chain of command because we don't like the commander in chief. That is the one thing you cannot violate as a uniformed officer. And unfortunately, the best example is Chairman Milley. Chairman Milley and I have spent countless time together. We did the Baghdadi raid together. We did so much on Iran together. We did so much after that together. And for him to come out and say and issue these letters and edicts where generals are signing off and making statements that are counter to the President of the United States, their boss, the commander in chief, and entering the political fray. That's the thing I found most offensive about these generals, is that these guys who had been career 30, 40-year guys, because that's how long it takes to get your 4th star, are going around the Department of Defense and saying, we don't care what the President or the Secretary of Defense said, we're not going to do that. And then giving book interviews during that time. I mean, we found that out later. We didn't find that out now. We talk about Jan 6 and whatnot, but they have time to give book interviews, but they don't have time to execute a withdrawal plan from Afghanistan that doesn't leave 13 of our soldiers dead. That was so shockingly offensive to me that these people who are supposed to be the apolitical officers became more political than Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff ever did. And people say, oh, you're just, you're talking about, Republican conservative talking points. And I'm like, I don't know that those were ever Republican or conservative talking points. I'm telling you what happened. And I'm the first guy to tell you, America loses, not Democrats, not Republicans, not independents, not whatever. America loses when you have a failure in the chain of command, especially when you have a commander in chief who, and I'll argue this all day long, from a national security perspective, in the modern era, no president has been more successful than Trump was in the national security arena. So it would have been one thing if they said everything he did failed, but almost everything he did in the national security arena succeeded.
Well, and he's being proven correct even as we move forward. I mean, whether it's the border, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, all these things that President Trump actually had a great plan for, and we were executing. You see, as soon as someone else's plan, like a Joe Biden, comes in, it's a disaster. And I think that institutional resistance, especially by the left, who are embedded in these bureaucratic positions and work against somebody that's really, again, I think Donald Trump, and I don't think anybody can argue with this, was transformational from a leadership standpoint. He was really a president that came in and said, we got to quit doing business as usual the same way we've always done it, under the guise of, well, these policies are inalterable because these, allegedly smart people in Washington, D.C. came up with these policies. I mean, you just see it kind of at every turn. And I'm sure that the folks at the political appointees at the State Department wanted to bash their head against the wall every day because, I mean, you just couldn't, you couldn't get anything done. Because look, I mean, I remember with the talking points. I went to China as chief of staff. It's the last time I'll ever go to China. I'm sure that if I went now, I'd be arrested.
We're not coming to get you. Don't go.
And I just think, why we're doing this whole Winter Olympics BS. And I mean, this is Berlin 1936 all over again. And she is going to have the worldwide platform to demonstrate that totalitarianism is the way of the future, and it is so inconsistent with what we believe as a country. But I digress. My point is that, I went to China. I had pretty much three talking points. I wanted to work on fentanyl. They let me talk about fentanyl. But then the State Department person, it was about repatriation of their criminal illegal aliens. We have 1 million Chinese in this country that China won't take back that have been convicted of crimes. Or it's hundreds of thousands anyway. Nobody talks about it because we don't want to embarrass China, but we were able to talk about that. And then there was some other talking point about that the State Department wanted to talk about, and it really didn't move the ball at all. I mean, ultimately President Trump was able to get Xi to schedule fentanyl in the precursors so they could reduce manufacturing. Now it's all moved to Mexico. But we made some progress in that regard. But
can I just highlight? I don't want to cut you off, but this is one of the things that I've been talking about, and I'm so glad you're bringing it up. Chinese fentanyl kills more young Americans than any one thing on planet Earth, and the fact that you went to China to take it on, that should be national news. That should be headline news. That should be things and you did it because you and President Trump agree that that's a national priority. But sorry, I just want to interject that it's now pouring in through the southern border. And people are dying by the thousands.
No, and this is, I mean, again, I looked all of these, kind of bureaucrats in China in the eye and told them this has to stop. You're poisoning our country. You can stop this. It's not a matter. You guys, if your totalitarian regime is so great, then the manufacturing of fentanyl in China should be stopped overnight if you wanted to. I'm convinced. I mean, obviously, fentanyl is one of the many ways that China tries to destabilize the United States of America. And, it is, I'm concerned, the left, especially in the Trump administration, wanted us always focused on Russia. And while Russia is a bad actor, they can't project power past Crimea, let's be honest. And so, it's the Chinese and their sophisticated 100-year war against us, and let's be honest, that's what we're in. It's not a hot war, but they are trying to destabilize us and dethrone us as the world leader. And quite frankly, and this is sad, and convince me I'm wrong, Kash, because I want to be wrong, but I think they're being successful. I think they're making progress.
Unfortunately, you're 100% right, and here's the difference. Because of President Trump's policies, he had folks like you in China demanding change from Chinese. He had the trade embargo and the trade balance right. Not only that, but he forced our intelligence community and our Defense Department to focus on China, because we don't talk about it, but China's going to outpace us in space and underwater. And people are like, oh, well, who cares about that stuff? Well, it's your 100-year war. Just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese government, the CCP under Xi Jinping, were taking target practice on American dummy ships in the South China Sea. Can you imagine a point in history where that's happened and America's been okay with that? Nothing like that's happened, because they know this administration and President Biden will allow themselves to be dictated to by Xi Jinping. And that's what's happening. And I totally agree with you. China is dictating around the world because and I'll give you an example. The Defense Department issues these things called campaign plans, CAM plans. It's fancy speak for how do you move the machine of the DOD, right? You come up with game plans. Iran, Russia, China, countering terrorism, bringing home hostages, what have you, right? That's how you move the machinery. The Biden administration's first campaign plan came out about 2 months ago for the Department of Defense, and it was on climate change. So the DOD, I mean, you can't make this up. The DOD's primary mission under President Biden is the weather. And I'm not saying that, antagonistically, we have an EPA and whatnot, but I think, and President Trump think, and you think the DOD's primary mission should be to take on China, to take on Russia.
Break stuff and kill people.
Right. and that's where we diverge. And people think I'm making that last bit up, and I wish I was, but that's literally, and they're here's the other thing they're chasing, right? They're chasing phantom ghost, white supremacy in the halls of the, you know what that does? You served. You know what that does to a guy or a gal on the line wearing the uniform who isn't a supremacist, who isn't affiliated with a supremacist, who doesn't know a supremacist? They're just looking for scapegoats to fulfill a political narrative. And now you scare the people who were brave enough to sign up for the mission. You scare them away from doing the mission because they're like, oh my God, they're going to label me a supremacist, even though I'm not one, because they need a target. That's absurd. That's outrageously offensive to the men and women.
Yeah. The nice thing about something like this conversation is we can go kind of all over and talk about so many things. And you mentioned China, and I have a philosophy on what's happening right now globally. And I think the crisis is you have the Russians essentially on the border with Ukraine, ready to invade, and you have the Chinese ready to invade Taiwan. I don't think either one makes a move without almost coordination to do it at the same time. It'll probably be while Joe Biden's taking a nap, but I mean, don't you think that we may find ourselves in 2 or 3 international crises with really no plan, to your point, versus like having this thing, be normal and under control like we had under
I think
Donald Trump.
The Chinese and the Russians, to use your examples about Taiwan and Crimea respectively, are smart enough and are taking advantage of America well enough to know they don't actually need an invasion. They just need to posture one like they're doing in Crimea, because I don't think Putin's dumb enough to actually go in an all-out war. That would be pretty stupid, especially since it's so close to Europe. And same with what people don't understand about the geography of Taiwan is you can't physically invade it. It's like running into a mountain from the sea and then going up 4,000 feet. You have to conduct like an aerial campaign to take out Taiwan. And I just don't think that's realistic. But where the Russians and the Chinese are outsmarting America because America has reduced the national security posture to focus on the weather, is they know, like Putin did during Russiagate. I mean, that guy spent like 40 grand and caused the biggest political disaster in U.S. history. They know if they posture well enough, if they propagate their media well enough, they can achieve their end result for a fraction of the cost without actually going to war. And I do believe they're smart enough to know that they shouldn't go to war in any effort on Taiwan or Crimea, because that will cause an actual global crisis, not just one with America. But I think they're threading the needle. I hate to say it. They're threading the needle brilliantly from their perspective, and it's harming American national interest. And I don't think the Biden administration is in any way, shape, or form ready to step up, except go to the podium at the UN and say, China, stop what you're doing, which is, no offense, but that doesn't work.
Yeah, that strongly worded letter is always effective in these diplomatically sensitive things.
It's even worse when you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff calling China and warning them that we might attack. But, him going on the phone and saying physically, Chairman Milley calling his counterpart and saying, don't worry, if we attack, I'll actually call you. I mean, talk about the most unpatriotic thing you can do.
Yeah, when that story broke, I thought I saw you on TV talking about that. And so I want you to, let's set the table. So you're, end of the administration, the election is over. Again, we're moving towards the transition from Trump to Biden. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff calls his counterpart in China and says, don't worry, even if he orders me to invade China, I won't.
Without giving you a phone call and a heads up. First of all, President Trump was never, ever going to order anyone to invade China. He knows the cost of that. And, I love these pundits that stand around and talk about it as they know the cost of war. I've been in the Oval Office with the President of the United States when he was signing the letters to the families of the fallen. And it was the only time I've ever seen President Trump get emotional. And so much so that he said, I don't ever want to sign another one of these letters. And he was the only president who said we're going to end the forever war. So for Chairman Milley to go out and posture that we're actually going to invade China is ludicrous. All it is satisfying the Democratic narrative and the mainstream media's fake news narrative that President Trump was out of control, which is totally opposite. And I'm glad you brought up transition. You had to do it and I had to do it. And look, the White House, rightfully so, said the DOD is a no-fail mission. You must transition successfully to the Biden administration with all haste. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did. We ran the largest transition in the Department of Defense's history because you can't fail on that mission. But those stories don't get out there. What they get out there is Chairman Milley's phone call, which he buried from us, by the way. It didn't come out till much later. And the fact that he was sitting down for book interviews, which didn't come out till much later. And he was taking actions without telling the Secretary of Defense or I, and he reports to us. You would think a 4-star general would understand the chain of command, but he only understood it when it was convenient for him. And that's why I have no problem speaking out against him, because the actions he took, I think, weakened America. And the only thing he cared about was, how do I keep my job past Jan 20th? And the way I do that is I have conversations privately with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and encourage them that I, Chairman Milley, am going to be the ring of steel, as he has said, around D.C., and make sure President Trump doesn't perform a insurrection or invasion. None of these things were a real conversation because they weren't happening, but it's what the media wanted out there, and he bought into it. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by law, cannot be a political figure, and he was more so than anyone in D.C.
Yeah, there's just I love these conversations because there's so many things I want to talk with you about. The narratives and Russia, Russia, as our former boss calls it, that was such a meta narrative. Everything fed into Russia. Even Brian Benchkowski, who is ultimately the head of the criminal division at DOJ, was held up in the Senate because he had represented Alpha Bank, or his firm had represented Alpha Bank. Everything had to flow into this narrative. And then when it falls apart, they just walk away like nothing happened. Like none of these pundits who were, had a bombshell report after bombshell report after. It was like, literally bombshells were going off the entire time I was at the Department of Justice. That was just the next shoe to drop. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump and Don. It was just one thing after another that never came to fruition, but just chuckleheads on TV, kind of making stuff up and wildly speculating from their sources, who are people that are not in the room, that have no knowledge of anything, and yet are willing to kind of make stuff up.
Once Trump got elected, you're right. They ran on the Russiagate narrative for 2 years, and then when we totally disproved it, they were like, we'll move on to impeachment and the Ukraine hoax. And then when that proved, to fail, we'll move on to attacking, his children's business dealings or his own personal business dealings. Yeah. And when that failed, we'll just move on to January 6th and the never-ending saga that is January 6th.
Well, and who's at the point of this clown parade? It's
Schiff.
Adam Schiff. Every one of those stories you just mentioned, Adam Schiff is literally the guy with the red nose on the front of this that's like claiming to have secret documents, he made up a phone call that didn't happen. And he made up, he had the evidence of the collusion. It's insane. And yet, they'll put him on MSNBC any night of the week to talk about what the next crazy idea is.
Well, the 7 people that watch it will. And the funny thing is, if we didn't watch what Adam Schiff put out, I think he'd lose 90% of his viewership. And we watch it for the comical relief that it is, because we know it's literally, you cannot make up a fiction larger than Adam Schiff's brain. And
be so smug about it. I keep looking at him like, this guy believes his own BS. He literally does.
He was on Sunday's show last week talking about, and this is the inflamed rhetoric that hurts America. He did say that Russia is going to invade the Ukraine. That's not what the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee should be telling the world. He should be telling the world what the intelligence actually says, not what his opinion is, because he wants the political narrative out there so they can go ahead and somehow blame Trump for the invasion of Putin's Crimea. All he cared. This is why we're winning. This is why we're winning. And I'm not even a political guy like you. I'm a national security and law enforcement guy. We're winning because we're going out there and talking about things like the border and fentanyl and national security and China and Russia. What is Adam Schiff and the Democrats and the Jan 6 guys talking about? Trump. It's Trump. This is Trump's fault. They're blaming Trump. They're blaming Trump. COVID, right? We haven't even talked about COVID or the vaccine mandates or the cure or anything like that. Everything's Trump's fault. And I think finally America's like, you know what? It's not Trump's fault. And most of it was the Democrats' fault. I mean, they won't say that publicly, but I think they're starting to realize it, which is why we're winning places like Virginia back.
Well, and I mean, you just have. I mean, again, I'm a very optimistic, happy person, and so I like to laugh. I like to have a good time. Some of this I don't take too seriously, but at the same time, it's only the future of our republic at stake, and and I think about the guys like you and I that have raised our hand that could be quite successful outside of government and politics, but we believe in the mission. I've spent probably almost 25% of my professional career at the Department of Justice, and it's an institution I love. And then I watched Merrick Garland have a press conference where, essentially it's just White House talking points to continue to feed this narrative that they don't want to die because it's all they're holding on to right now. I mean, it's
They
so
don't have anything
disgusting.
else. And 2022, they've all but conceded the midterms are going to the Republicans. While that's good for us in the country, we still have to do this for 11 more months, which I think is bad for the country because the only thing we're going to, as you pointed out, that they're going to talk about is ad infinitum is Jan 6, Jan 6, Jan 6. It's the only political talking point they have left because they lost the Russiagate talking point. Now, just wait till your colleague, and this is my prediction, I don't know if it's going to come true, but I think it is. Wait till your colleague, John Durham, comes out with some pretty severe indictments over the next couple of months to put the Russiagate narrative, the Russiagate investigation back front and center. Now, the mainstream media won't cover it, but I still think it's the biggest political criminal enterprise to befall America election cycle, and I think it's far from over.
Yeah. And it's a shame that the FBI wasn't more skeptical of that, and I really believe that they knew the truth. The senior, Andy McCabe and those guys wanted it to be true. They did not like Donald Trump, and they know that if you could create enough smoke, that you would get exactly what this was, which was a spontaneous combustion of the appointment of a special counsel, which is almost unsurvivable politically, and the fact that Donald Trump fought and fought and fought at every turn to defeat what was a witch hunt. Let's be honest. I mean, there was no predication for the appointment of a special counsel. There just wasn't, and no one could tell me when I was acting attorney general what the predication was. It was essentially the best explanation I ever got was it was a good way to get Andy McCabe out of the investigation, but it didn't because he was still in the chain of command at the FBI. So I don't know. I mean, I think that was so unfair to the president, and I know that there are many that don't like Donald Trump, and so they think he deserved it, but nobody deserves the way he was treated for those first 2 years, and how and in spite of it all, he was incredibly successful implementing some great policies that made Americans and ordinary Americans, like places where I'm from, like Iowa and places real America where you're from, that made such a difference in ordinary people's
and I don't
lives.
think people talk. You at the Department of Justice, I don't think people talk about this enough. You guys did criminal justice reform under President Trump, not the Democrats, not Obama. Biden's not doing it. You guys did that. Criminal justice reform, commutations, and you guys went back. And look, as a guy who's a former public defender and went up against these sentencings on a regular basis for my clients, I was a public defender in the Obama administration. There was no relent there. And I think some criminals deserve the maximum punishment, but so many were just sort of a calculation in the pyramid scheme of what number goes in here and this is your sentence. But you guys did criminal justice reform under President Trump. That's not a Republican conservative talking point, but it's one you would think that would be heralded by the left normally. And just an example of it's not because it happened under Trump.
Yeah, and it's a shame that, and I don't understand. They're wasting a lot of time up on Capitol Hill right now on a lot of things that are never going to become law, and and a lot of bad ideas. And there's some really good proposals on criminal justice reform that could sort of follow on from the First Step Act. We could nerd out on sort of criminal sentencing, but the acquitted conduct, I think, is one of the things that I've seen too many people beat a conspiracy charge at trial and then have that financial calculation still brought in. And so all of a sudden there are hundreds of millions of dollars again when, the whole reason they went to trial was to try to beat that. And so, and again, there's a lot of different things, that could be improved. But to your point, and I always have to say this because everybody thinks that somehow, it's different than what it is violent criminals need to be off the streets and 100%. Need to be locked up. And child molesters and rapists and people that all these kind of things, but there needs to be some rational
but there is
system where we just don't get these crazy outcomes, and people that are not going to offend again and are not going to be a menace to society.
and these systems, look, that's a evidence-based approach to reforming criminal justice, which you implemented under President Trump. Fast forward to what the left is doing. They just went as far away from that as they possibly could. No cash bail. Everybody gets a bond for free. If you've committed a crime, a severe crime, we're still going to let you out. And you and I are talking, we've talked previously about the stories about if you've committed a violent felony, the tendency for you to commit another violent felony is twofold. And we've seen people go out and commit homicides that were previously arrested for robberies and were let out on these no cash bail bond things. And also that doesn't even come into not even talking about how we handle illegal immigrants, because they were used to be put through a system where if you're an illegal immigrant and you're here illegally, you should be expelled from this country. But same thing with them. They're just put back into society. And I'm not saying they're all criminals, but some of these individuals commit the most egregious crimes possible, and they murder grandmothers and babies and commit sexual offense acts. And it just gets brushed over because the media helped install these crazy policies. I mean, the one thing that sticks in my mind the most is just, probably about 4 or 5 months ago, a 2-year-old was gunned down in Chicago and killed. And it didn't even become a blip on the media cycle. And for me, that just sort of was a big reset moment in being like, where are we in the criminal justice process here? How is this so bad? And it's because of the policies that have been implemented.
Yeah, no, and we went through this whole defund the police. We went through this whole blame the cops for every bad outcome. All these people resisting arrest that then end up being injured or killed. It's again, are there cops that do bad things? Yes, and they are always punished. They should be punished, and they shouldn't wear the badge. But that doesn't mean you paint with a broad brush, because really, I mean, you talk about a thin blue line, but I mean these members of law enforcement, I mean they are the heroes on a daily basis. They run to the sound of guns. They are 911 at your door. They don't know what they're going to interact with, and we give them such an enormous portfolio of things to be responsible for: marriage counseling, practically, domestic violence, interventionists, investigation of crimes, sort of traffic. I mean, I just have it's not going to be a surprise to you, but I just have such a admiration for the men and women of law enforcement that they just, they can't be thanked enough. And even if there are bad ones along the way, I still think, the vast, enormous majority of these law enforcement officers are just heroes.
Yeah, and we've taken away their tools. I mean, I know so many people at home in New York City that are cops, and they're like, we can't go out and perform our job because the cops are going to get in trouble for violating some policy. And it's on full display in New York City. There's a new mayor there now. There's a new district attorney. Yep. The district attorney just implemented a program where he is not going to ask for prison time for any defendant who is convicted of a crime that doesn't involve homicide or robbery or sexual violence. That is insane. That's insane. I don't know what the new New York City mayor is going to do. He hasn't responded to that. But what are police officers supposed to do? If you see someone getting kicked in the head, what's the point of arresting him if he's not going to get put in prison?
Yeah, that's nuts. And there has to be some punishment. It has to be proportionate to the crime. And, obviously, the more crimes you commit, the longer your sentence should be, especially if you're a serial, criminal. And, I don't get these new policies, this kind of new prosecutorial discretion model that says, kind of essentially, unless you're the worst of the worst, you get nothing. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Well, I know we only got a little bit longer, and I want to know what you're up to now. I want to hear all about the affirmative litigation project that you're working on, and I think it's so important to kind of what's happening in our country and how we kind of take back our republic.
If I can have 2 minutes, and thanks again for having me on. This was actually the most engaging conversation I've had in months, so you should do this.
Well, we'll do part two later. So
you should have more interesting people than me, so maybe more than my mother and you watch it. But
well, some will be good, some will be bad. Right now you're one of the top, but we haven't done a lot of
these. No, but I appreciate. I'm working on this thing called fightwithkash.com. It's fightwithkash.com with a K, and basically what it is after Devin and I ran Russiagate, the media took a turn. We were defamed mercilessly. They came after our families. They called us some pretty nasty things. And we thought we got to clear our name. So I filed lawsuits on my behalf. And Devin did it on his own. I'm suing Politico, the New York Times, and CNN for defamation because they actually defamed me. Not even like maybe or gray zone, but actually defamed me. And I learned that I'm not the only one that got defamed. And so many people around America, when I go meet them, are being like, hey, I got defamed. I got the platform, but I don't have the money. I don't know how to do this. How do I get help? How do I clear my name? So I said, you know what? I'm out of government. I'll start a fund. I started a charitable offensive trust called fightwithkash.com. We're raising money around the country. And basically what you do is you go to the website, and if you can donate, we'd really appreciate your support. But if you go to the website, you can reach us directly, our legal team directly, with a summary of the situation that you've been put in. And if you have a viable defamation case, we will pay for your legal cost. Full stop. You will not pay a dime. And we will allow you to have your day in court so your name can be cleared. And what happens also as a secondary effect is, and this is, I think, something Devin and I believe in deeply, and I know you do too, is we correct the media. We go out and we hit the media with a monetary silver bullet because that's the only thing they'll understand, and we'll prove to the American public that they were lying about people's good character. And I think that's why we started fightwithkash.com. So I appreciate you letting me support it. And
yeah, and you're seeing these cases. You're seeing these cases start to, kind of gain some traction. There's been the high-profile ones, but I mean, this is where the media, I think, has become arrogant. I think they've become too powerful. We've all taken to heart, somebody that buys ink by the barrel, is hard to fight against. But I think to your point, lawyers and the law is on our side when people are legitimately defamed and false, things are said about them. And I think it's such an important cause. And, where are we in some of those lawsuits? I ran into Devin in Iowa several months ago, and, he's been kind of up and down with the courts. But, I think ultimately his case or some of these other cases are going to get to the actual challenge, which is New York Times versus Sullivan, which kind of creates a higher bar than I think was ever intended under law. Why don't you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Devin's actually doing really well. He actually had a major victory in the appellate courts, in the appellate federal court.
Yeah, in the Eighth Circuit. Right.
On one of his defamation cases. And my cases personally are getting ready to hit trial posture because we're not taking a knee. We're not taking any settlement from these guys. And we're just out there as an example, hopefully. Like, we're not in it for the money. Like, that's not why we're doing it. But we want to show people that you can get your name back. You can get your day in court. And so we've actually, Fight with Kash already has, I think, 3 to 5 other cases in the pipeline that we're currently reviewing for Americans across the country. And as long as there's a viable legal action, we will take it. It doesn't matter what your background is. what your politics are. And so we got going last year, and we're just looking for more support. And we'll keep you guys updated on our website about all of our latest litigation.
Yeah, so that's fightwithkash.com with a Kash with a K. Where else can people find you and keep track of
that's
what you're
it.
up to?
Anybody else on Twitter or Facebook or Telegram is impersonating me. So that's a whole nother story, but I don't have social media. But you can find me on Matt Whitaker's show, Liberty and Justice, if he has me back.
That's right. Someday it'll be worth a bunch of money, this episode.
Just remember to buy me lunch that day.
I will. Well, Kash, thanks for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in person in the future.